In a packed courtroom, the tension was thick. All eyes were on former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. Then she stepped up to the microphone, and boom. What she said next left the room in absolute silence. People shifted uncomfortably. Even the judge, James Boasberg, seemed momentarily stunned. This wasn't just a legal twist, it was a political earthquake. So what did Pam Bondi say that stopped the room cold? Why was Judge Boasberg at the center of it? And what does this mean for the country going forward? Buckle up. This story moves fast, and every second counts. Let's break it all down. Pam Bondi isn't your everyday legal commentator. She's a legal force with a sharp intellect, a no-nonsense approach, and a national profile that has only grown since she left office. From 2011 to 2019, Bondi served as Florida's Attorney General, but it wasn't just her legal record that earned her attention. It was her fierce and unapologetic stance on major political and legal issues. During the Trump administration, Bondi rose even higher in the national spotlight, taking part in major legal defenses, advisory roles, and public commentary that earned both praise and criticism across the political spectrum. Her public persona is clear. Bondi doesn't tiptoe. She doesn't sugarcoat. She says the quiet part out loud, and that makes her a rare figure in today's legal political landscape. She's not someone who's afraid of challenging authority, institutions, or narratives, especially when she believes justice or the Constitution is at stake. In recent years, Bondi has stepped into an even more prominent spotlight, diving into some of the most controversial legal battles in the country. She's become known for her fiery delivery and her ability to cut through complex legal issues with clarity and punch. Whether she's appearing on national television, filing legal briefs, or walking into a high-profile courtroom, Bondi commands attention. The weight of her words carries not just legal expertise, but political power. So when she entered the courtroom on this particular day, one that was already charged with tension, everyone in the room knew something significant was about to happen. Lawyers straightened up. Reporters leaned forward. Even observers in the gallery felt the mood shift. There was a kind of crackling energy in the air, the kind that comes before a thunderstorm. People expected her to make waves, but no one was prepared for what she was about to drop. The moment she stepped forward, the room fell into an expectant hush. Bondi didn't bother with small talk or legal niceties. She went straight for the jugular. And her target? None other than Judge James Boasberg. Now this is crucial. Judge Boasberg isn't just another federal judge. He holds one of the most sensitive and influential roles in the country as Chief Judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, a court that handles powerful cases involving the federal government, intelligence services, and surveillance laws. Perhaps most notably, Boasberg has been closely tied to the FISA Court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which came under heavy scrutiny after the Trump-Russia investigations revealed how surveillance was authorized against members of Trump's campaign based on what many believe was questionable evidence. It's within this context that Bondi unleashed her statement. She didn't mince words. She claimed, directly and without hesitation, that Judge Boasberg had overseen and approved deeply flawed surveillance applications she claimed were built on manipulated data, politically biased sources, and withheld information. She accused the court, under Boasberg's watch, of failing to demand transparency or accountability, effectively allowing a powerful government tool to be turned against American citizens for political gain. The courtroom didn't just go quiet, it froze. Even the most experienced legal analysts in the room weren't ready for what she said. You could feel the oxygen drain from the space as the weight of the accusation settled in. This wasn't just about errors or bureaucratic oversights. Bondi was alleging systemic deception, and worse, that Judge Boasberg allowed it to happen on his watch. She called it a betrayal of trust, a breakdown in the very system designed to protect Americans from government overreach. To those in the courtroom and those watching from across the country, it was a shocking moment, not because they didn't believe something was wrong, but because few had ever dared to say it so directly, especially in front of the very judge being called out. Bondi wasn't hinting. She wasn't dancing around the topic. She stood in front of a federal courtroom and dropped a verbal bombshell that instantly reframed the debate around FISA, surveillance, and judicial oversight. And she didn't stop there. She backed her claims with newly unsealed documents, pointing to internal communications and memos that suggested red flags were raised about intelligence sources being unreliable. Yet those red flags were either ignored or buried. Bondi laid out a picture of a process that had lost its integrity, of a judge who looked the other way, and of a justice system that desperately needed reform. The fact that it was Bondi delivering this message mattered. She wasn't a fringe figure. She wasn't some obscure legal activist. She was a former top state prosecutor with national credibility. Her voice carried weight, and her claims couldn't be dismissed easily. As she finished, the courtroom remained silent, not because people didn't want to respond, but because they didn't know how. She had dropped a truth bomb that no one could ignore, and it left everyone, lawyers, judges, journalists, facing a question they weren't ready to answer. If Bondi was right, what does that mean for the legitimacy of the very courts we rely on? And just like that, the silence spoke louder than words. To understand the full weight of what Pam Bondi said, you first have to understand exactly who Judge James Boasberg is, and why her words landed like a shockwave through the courtroom and beyond. James Boasberg is not some mid-level judge working on minor cases. He holds one of the most powerful and influential positions in the entire federal judiciary. As the Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, he presides over a court that hears some of the most high-stakes legal battles in the nation, many of them involving the federal government, national security, and surveillance issues. But what truly puts him in the spotlight is his deep connection to the FISA Court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, a body that operates largely in secret and plays a massive role in determining when and how U.S. intelligence agencies can surveil individuals, including American citizens. The FISA Court was designed with one primary purpose: to allow the government to pursue covert surveillance of suspected foreign agents, while still maintaining judicial oversight to protect constitutional rights. It was a post-Watergate reform aimed at balancing national security with civil liberties. But in recent years, especially during and after the Trump-Russia investigation, the FISA process has come under intense scrutiny, and Judge Boasberg was at the heart of that storm. During the FBI's investigation into alleged ties between the Trump campaign and Russia, FISA warrants were used to surveil campaign associate Carter Page. These warrants relied heavily on the now infamous Steele dossier, a piece of opposition research funded by political opponents of Donald Trump. Over time, it became clear that the dossier contained unverified, even debunked claims. Yet, the FISA Court approved multiple warrant applications based on this information. That revelation ignited a firestorm. How could one of the most secretive and supposedly careful courts in the country sign off on surveillance that, in hindsight, lacked proper vetting and may have been politically motivated? Boasberg was one of the judges who reviewed and approved some of these warrants. His defenders argue he did what any judge would do: rely on the information provided by the intelligence agencies. But critics say that's exactly the problem. They claim the FISA Court has become a rubber stamp, blindly trusting whatever narrative is presented without demanding real accountability or accuracy. And in the minds of many Americans, Judge Boasberg became a symbol of that failure. This is the environment Pam Bondi stepped into. She didn't just walk into a courtroom. She walked into a legal powder keg. And then she lit a match. When Bondi addressed the court, she didn't tiptoe around the issue. She accused Judge Boasberg, directly or by implication, of having played a role in undermining the very principles the judiciary is supposed to uphold. According to her, the court's failure to catch or question the flaws in the FISA applications wasn't a simple oversight. It was, in her words, systemic deception. She alleged that the judge didn't ask enough questions, didn't demand transparency, and ultimately allowed politically motivated actors to use the court as a weapon against their opponents. Her words cut deep because they weren't coming from a fringe figure. They were coming from someone with deep legal experience, a former state attorney general who understands exactly how the system is supposed to work. And she wasn't making vague claims. She cited internal memos and intelligence reports that showed inconsistencies, omissions, and even direct warnings about the reliability of sources used in the FISA applications. Her message was clear: the court had the information. It ignored it, and the person in charge, Judge Boasberg, needed to answer for that. In a moment that lasted only minutes, Bondi took one of the most complex legal scandals of the last decade and made it real, personal, and urgent. No more hiding behind sealed documents and legalese. No more pretending the system worked as it should. She told the room, and the country, that the public's trust in the justice system had been betrayed, and that betrayal happened on Boasberg's watch. It was more than a legal argument. It was a public indictment of the very institution meant to safeguard civil liberties. The reason this hit so hard is because for years, the FISA court has operated in near-total secrecy. The public has no access to the proceedings, and judges like Boasberg are rarely, if ever, challenged in such a direct and open way. Bondi broke that wall of silence, and in doing so, she turned a complicated surveillance scandal into a clear-cut question of accountability. Her attack on Boasberg wasn't just about the past. It was about the future. If judges are allowed to approve faulty surveillance applications without consequence, what does that mean for democracy? If political agendas can hijack the intelligence process, what's stopping it from happening again? Pam Bondi's firestorm didn't just expose a crack in the system, it exposed a canyon. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom had to ask themselves, are we going to keep ignoring it? That's why the silence after her words was so deafening. Because deep down they knew, this wasn't just about one judge. It was about all of them. Now, here's the moment that made the room go dead silent. It began like any other high-stakes legal proceeding. The room was tense but controlled. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but every reporter, clerk, and observer present knew this wasn't going to be a routine appearance. Pam Bondi wasn't there to play defense or engage in dry legal jargon. She was there to drop something big. And when she took the floor, her body language told the story. Calm, focused, but with the unmistakable energy of someone about to launch a missile. Then it happened. Bondi stood before the court and made a stunning claim, one that sent immediate shockwaves across the room. She didn't build up slowly. She didn't leave anything to implication. She directly accused Judge James Boasberg, the very man presiding over the hearing and sitting just feet away, of knowingly allowing flawed surveillance applications to be approved without so much as demanding proper accountability. You could practically feel the shift in the air. People who had been casually taking notes suddenly stopped writing. Some sat straighter in their chairs, unsure if they'd just heard her correctly. But Bondi wasn't done. She pulled out documents, recently unsealed internal memos and reports, and presented them as evidence. According to Bondi, these memos showed glaring inconsistencies in the surveillance applications submitted to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, specifically the ones connected to investigations into the Trump campaign during and after the 2016 election. She argued that intelligence agencies either ignored or intentionally downplayed key pieces of information that would have undermined their entire case for surveillance. These weren't minor omissions or clerical mistakes. These were critical facts, Bondi said, that went unacknowledged in order to push a narrative. And then came the moment that froze everyone in place. She looked squarely ahead and said it, clearly and forcefully. This wasn't a mistake. This was systemic deception, and this court rubber-stamped it. The words hit like a hammer. For a split second, no one moved. Then came the reaction, not loud, but visible. You could hear a sharp breath from somewhere in the gallery. A couple of reporters turned to one another, eyebrows raised, their pens hovering over notepads. One journalist mouthed the word, "Wow." Legal aides glanced at their attorneys. Some leaned in as if to say, "Did she really just say that?" Yes, she did. Without hesitation. Without blinking. And what about Judge Boasberg? He didn't flinch. He didn't object. He didn't interrupt. He simply stared ahead, expressionless, as if processing what had just been laid at his feet. No denial. No defense. Just silence. But the courtroom didn't need his response to feel the weight of the moment, because everyone already knew what this meant. This wasn't just a critique of a process. It was a direct challenge to the integrity of a federal court and to the man overseeing it. In legal circles, accusations like that are almost unheard of. Judges are rarely named like this, especially by former state attorneys general, and especially not with such aggressive language. Bondi's use of the phrase systemic deception wasn't casual. It was deliberate. She wasn't just calling out errors. She was saying the entire process had been hijacked. She was suggesting a pattern of corruption and cover-up that went deeper than just a bad application or a single oversight. And in doing so, she drew a line in the sand. There was no way to spin it. Either the judge had failed to notice what Bondi claimed was obvious, or he saw it and approved it anyway. Either version was damning. No one dared to interrupt her. No one tried to argue. The courtroom remained frozen in that eerie silence, the kind that lingers not because people don't care, but because they're unsure how to respond to what's just been said. It was as if the truth had been spoken aloud in a room used to secrets and formalities, and no one knew what to do with it. Even after she finished speaking, the tension didn't break. People didn't start whispering or shuffling papers like they usually do when a speaker wraps up. They just stayed still, stunned, trying to absorb what had just happened. Pam Bondi had done something very few people have the courage or the audacity to do. She walked into a federal courtroom, pointed at a sitting judge, and told the truth as she saw it, knowing full well the political and professional fallout that could follow. And in doing so, she turned what was supposed to be just another hearing into a moment of reckoning. Her words echoed in that silence, and though Judge Boasberg didn't respond, his stillness said it all. Whether guilty or caught off guard, he had just been put on notice, and the rest of the country was watching. Within minutes of Pam Bondi's fiery courtroom moment, the outside world caught wind of what had just gone down, and everything exploded. Someone in the gallery had quickly texted reporters. Then someone leaked a transcript snippet. Before long, a short clip from a courthouse audio recording surfaced online, and that was all it took. The internet lit up. Twitter, Facebook, Truth Social, YouTube, and even platforms that usually steer clear of legal debates were suddenly buzzing with one thing: Pam Bondi's takedown of Judge James Boasberg. Conservatives wasted no time. For years, they had warned about abuses within the visa system and the way the court had been used, allegedly, to spy on political opponents. Bondi's blunt statement, backed by internal documents, was like throwing gasoline on a fire. They hailed her as a hero, a truth-teller, a woman who had the guts to walk into a courtroom and speak aloud what others only whispered in private. Hashtags like hashtag Bondi Bombshell, hashtag FISAgate, and hashtag Deep State Exposed began trending. Influential commentators on both TV and social media ran clips of her remarks nonstop. On conservative talk shows, Bondi was applauded as the only one with a backbone, someone who held the establishment accountable. Her words were replayed in slow motion, dissected by legal pundits, and quoted in bold letters across thumbnails and headlines. But while the political firestorm grew, something more serious started happening in the background. Legal analysts, some neutral, some skeptical, began quietly investigating the documents Bondi had cited in court. And this is where things took a dramatic turn. The documents were real. They weren't speculation. They weren't blog posts or anonymous sources. They were official, recently unsealed government memos and internal FBI communications. And they did, in fact, show that some of the intelligence used in key visa warrant applications had been flagged. Multiple sources were described in internal notes as unverified or of questionable reliability. There were references to concerns raised about the political origins of the Steele dossier. Some analysts within the FBI had even urged caution, but their warnings didn't make it into the final warrant applications. That revelation confirmed what Bondi had claimed in court, that the visa process was compromised. That judges, including Boasberg, were handed flawed materials, and those flaws weren't corrected before the rubber stamp was applied. Even Bondi's critics couldn't ignore it. The documents she referenced weren't based on speculation. They came straight from inside the system, and that made the courtroom moment impossible to wave away. Still, defenders of Judge Boasberg weren't quiet. Former federal prosecutors and legal scholars came forward, arguing that Bondi's accusations were overblown, politically motivated, and designed to erode public trust in the judiciary. Some said she was grandstanding, trying to score political points by vilifying a respected federal judge. Others claimed she was undermining the court system itself at a time when institutional trust was already fragile. But even among the critics, there was a subtle shift. Few were willing to deny that the visa system had problems. Few wanted to publicly defend the Steele dossier or the FBI's handling of its intelligence. And while they questioned Bondi's motives, many admitted begrudgingly, that her claims had substance. Most importantly, Bondi's confrontation forced the broader media to finally take a second look at something they had largely avoided. For years, the FISA story had been dismissed by many as a partisan talking point. Outlets either ignored it or covered it with heavy skepticism. But Bondi's dramatic entrance, backed by hard documentation and a courtroom setting, changed the narrative overnight. Suddenly, the very outlets that had been quiet about FISA abuses began running stories. Editorials appeared asking whether the surveillance court had too much unchecked power. TV panels debated the role of judges like Boasberg. Questions were raised about reform, about oversight, about transparency. And sitting in the middle of it all, center stage, was Judge James Boasberg. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. As a judge on the FISA court, he operated mostly in the shadows. His decisions rarely made headlines. His name was known only to policy insiders and intelligence experts. But now, thanks to Bondi, Boasberg had become a household name, and not in the way he likely expected. Pam Bondi's moment in court didn't just spark a trend or generate viral clips. It cracked open a conversation that had been tightly sealed for years. Her words forced the country and the media to confront uncomfortable truths about surveillance, secrecy, and unchecked power. Whether you viewed her as a patriot or a political agitator, one thing was clear: Bondi didn't just speak. She detonated. And when the smoke cleared, Judge Boasberg was standing in the spotlight, with the entire nation watching. Here's the bottom line. Pam Bondi's bombshell wasn't just another courtroom soundbite destined to fade into the news cycle. It was a clear turning point, both politically and legally. In just a few minutes of bold, direct speech, Bondi reignited a national conversation that many in power were hoping to leave behind. The courtroom exchange might have seemed, to some, like just another dramatic moment in the long-running saga of partisan legal fights. But to many Americans, it felt different. This wasn't just about a judge or a single surveillance case. It was about something much deeper. The credibility of the entire justice system, the integrity of the intelligence process, and whether or not political power has grown so unchecked that even judges feel immune from public scrutiny. Pam Bondi didn't just question Judge James Boasberg's actions. She held them up to the light, demanding answers, demanding accountability, and demanding reform. And her message landed with real force. Not only because of what she said, but because of how she said it: calm, confident, and with the backing of legitimate evidence. The aftermath was immediate and loud. Within hours, clips of her statement were trending across social media. Cable news channels from both ends of the political spectrum aired heated panel discussions. Political influencers dissected her words. And soon, the debate spilled over into Capitol Hill. Senators and House members, many of whom had raised concerns about FISA abuse in the past, saw an opportunity. This wasn't just political fuel. It was political cover. Bondi had cracked open the door, and now they were walking through it. Calls for new congressional hearings began to echo across the media. Republican leadership hinted that subpoenas might be on the table. A few Democrats, while less vocal, acknowledged that the FISA court needed more oversight. Some lawmakers even floated early proposals: mandatory independent reviews of all politically related surveillance requests, reforms to how evidence is verified before reaching a FISA judge, and even public summaries of key court decisions, something nearly unheard of in a court built on secrecy. The momentum was unmistakable. What had once been a fringe issue, discussed mainly on conservative podcasts or behind closed doors, was now a central topic on mainstream news. And what about Judge Boasberg? As a federal judge, especially one appointed for life, he's not going anywhere easily. The process for removing a federal judge is incredibly difficult, requiring impeachment by the House and conviction by the Senate. Historically, that almost never happens. But Bondi wasn't necessarily calling for his removal. Her goal, as she later clarified in a follow-up interview, was bigger than that. "This isn't about revenge," she said, in a sit-down that aired nationally. "It's about restoring faith in our institutions. If we don't fix this now, we may never be able to." Her words hit a nerve. In an era where trust in American institutions, Congress, the courts, the media, is near historic lows, Bondi's call to action wasn't just legal commentary. It was a rallying cry. And despite the criticism from some legal experts and partisan pundits, the broader public seemed to connect with it. Online polls and comment sections flooded with support. People weren't just angry, they were energized. For many, this was the first time they'd heard someone with Bondi's credentials articulate the frustration they'd felt for years, that the justice system has two tiers, and those at the top rarely face the same consequences as everyone else. The ripple effects continued. Think tanks began drafting FISA reform proposals. Legal watchdog groups reopened old cases to examine patterns of surveillance abuse. Even journalists who had dismissed the issue in previous years were now being forced to take another look. Bondi, for her part, isn't backing down. She's already hinted that more revelations could be on the way. More memos. More evidence. More pressure. She's not just playing a short game. She's setting up for a longer campaign, one that goes beyond headlines and hashtags. And perhaps that's what truly makes this moment different. In the past, stories like this often vanished within days. But this time, the conversation has legs. Bondi's statement didn't just challenge one judge. It cracked the foundation of a system that, until now, had largely operated in the shadows. And it forced Americans to ask themselves an uncomfortable question. If this could happen once, how many times has it already happened? The courtroom may have gone silent in that moment, but the echo is still being heard, loud and clear. So here's the question for you. Was Pam Bondi right to call out Judge Boasberg? Or was this just political theater? Whatever you believe, one thing is clear. Something big just shifted. And it all started with one woman, one moment, and one very silent courtroom. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Until next time, stay informed and stay bold. Let me know if you'd like a version with a voiceover tone, background music cues, or edits for short-form content like YouTube Shorts or Reels.